Thank you.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem. So I wanted to just kind of juxtapose two different ideas as we talk about why engaging youth is important. And the first is this image here that you see, this this proverb, which says, if you want to cut a man's hair, is it not better if he's in the room? And so, just think on that for a minute. And then the other one is an adage you may have heard from the disability rights movement that says nothing about us without us. So really the ideas behind this proverb and behind that adage is that if we want to represent youth's needs, we need to engage youth in the decisions. And by engaging youth, we gain a better understanding of the issues they face and the policies that they want to see. And essentially, if we want to create policy that's reflective of youth needs, we really need youth working with adults collaboratively. And then the other idea is, in terms of why engaging youth is important, is that when we create opportunities for youth voice, we really allow for youth to expand their leadership and advocacy skills. And then the last thing I wanted to point out in terms of why engaging youth is important, that's particularly relevant to the Community Voices for Health project, is that there's actually direct health benefits to engaging youth and engaging people. And so I don't know how many of you have ever been exposed to a survey called the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, but it's a survey that is distributed around the country in middle schools and high schools at certain ages. And I think virtually every school in every state takes the YRBS, and it identifies different risk factors for youth. And so it ranges from things like, are you texting and driving, to, are you using substances, a bunch of different questions. But on the YRBS, there used to be a question of if youth feel like they matter to their community. And what's really interesting about this is that there's a lot of data out there and you may have been hearing about some of this lately with the pandemic, that suggests that social isolation can be as toxic as smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. And there's another study that came out by Cigna a few years ago that found that the youth are actually the most socially isolated group of any generation, and that this tends to be, the isolation tends to be worse the younger the generation. So millennials are lonelier than Gen Xers, and Gen Z are lonelier than millennials. So I wanted to kind of highlight that to just say, engaging youth is actually a health issue. And so not only are there a lot of benefits to creating opportunities for youth to participate in your projects in terms of understanding them and in terms of creating stronger policy, but it also will make your communities healthier, essentially. And we can go on to the next slide. And Jennifer, I think I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Kihara. So just really quickly, my name is Jennifer Orellana. I'm the coordinator for the public engagement team at Public Agenda, and I'm really happy to be here with you all today, and I appreciate you taking time out of your schedules for us to come together as a group to discuss and explore youth engagement. So we're going to start by talking about some models of youth engagement. For this workshop, we're going to focus on Hart's Ladder, the youth engagement continuum, positive youth development, and asset-based youth development. So I'm going to go to the next slide. And so what you're seeing here is a graphic of something called Hart's Ladder of Participation. And this is actually a tool from the 1997 book, Children's Participation, the Theory and Practice of Involving Young Citizens in Community Development and Environmental Care. And this is a book that was written by a sociologist named Roger Hart for UNICEF. And so, as you can see from the graphic, the ladder is categorized and split into two buckets, if you will. So we have non-participation and we have degrees of participation. And so the bottom three rungs, as you can see, exhibit behaviors that deter youth from participation and can lend themselves to something called adultism. And according to the website, or I'm sorry, the organization Youth on Board, adultism is defined as the assumption that young people are inferior to adults simply because of their young age. Adults often act on this assumption by limiting access to decision-making, information, resources, human rights, and opportunities for youth to share their thoughts. And then if we look at the rungs 4 through 8, those that are categorized as degrees of participation, these actually provide cooperative practices between adults and young people in order for youth to be more engaged in activities. And then some of the activities or actions that align with the latter can be embodied by things such as community youth boards, and that is aligned to rung number 4, which is the youth assigned and informed rung. Participatory action research, which aligns with rung number 6 and is the adult initiated shared decisions with young people. And then youth-led activism, which is aligned with rung number 8, which is categorized by young people and adults sharing decision-making. And so these rungs, these gradients or degrees of participation provide youth with distinct roles and responsibilities, and as well as opportunities for adults and youth to make this work and make decisions together. So another model that we're going to be talking briefly about is the youth engagement continuum. And so back in the early 2000s, a national collective of foundations, organizations, and practitioners that support youth organizing proposed this youth engagement continuum. It is a model that describes both the forms and the degrees of youth engagement on a developmental continuum that progresses toward authentic youth empowerment in educational, civic, and political participation and decision-making. And as you can see at the top of the slide, there's an arrow that progresses through the 4 developmental levels or progressive degrees of youth engagement. And so those are intervention, development, collective empowerment, and systemic change. And underneath that, we can see there are 5 forms of youth participation that are aligned with each developmental progression. So under intervention, we have youth services. Underneath development, we have youth development. And then we have grouped together under collective empowerment, we have youth leadership and youth civic engagement. And then lastly, under systemic change, we have youth organizing. And so to share a few examples of these 5 forms of youth engagement, they can be things that include, for example, ensuring that kids are going home from school for the weekend with a backpack full of food, and that would fall under the youth services approach. Youth employment programs that provide training and skill building and mentoring can fall under youth development. For youth leadership, that type of development occurs when youth are receiving the education, training, and other forms of support, advocacy, and encouragement they need from youth leaders and adult allies to move beyond personal problem solving to understanding and envisioning their potential role in community problem solving. And then for youth civic engagement, this is done by providing youth with civic education and opportunities to equip them with the ability to exercise their civic power and effectively participate as citizens. And a great example of that, how an organization does that. So there's an organization called Generation Citizen, and they do this through student-driven projects where youth are learning how to affect policy change by engaging with local government and leaders to solve community problems. And so through this method or through this continuum, if you will, there are opportunities for youth to build upon previous skills until they create positive systemic change within themselves, as well as within their communities. So I'm going to move through to the next model, and this one is positive youth development. So positive experiences plus positive relationships plus positive environments equal positive youth development. This is both a philosophy as well as a programmatic approach for supporting healthy, productive, and engaged youth as they grow into adulthood. It's an intentional, pro-social approach that engages youth within their communities, schools, organizations, peer groups, and families in a way that is productive and constructive. This model recognizes and utilizes and enhances young people's strengths, and it promotes positive outcomes for youth by providing opportunities, fostering positive relationships, and providing the support needed to build on their leadership strengths. And this model, it works by allowing youth to develop assets that are not only enhancing their lives on the personal level, so that can include academic, social, and interpersonal, but it also provides a framework where they can also be civically engaged. Positive youth development identifies 4 different components that are then used to work with youth to improve and develop. And those include assets. So this means providing youth with resources and skills that they need to achieve desired outcomes. This is also inclusive of agency, right? So youth have an identity, a developed set of skills, as well as goals that then allow them to make decisions and achieve those desired outcomes. This also includes an enabling environment, right? So youth are in an environment that allows them to access those assets and to tap into that agency to make decisions for themselves. And this is done in order to support them to come to a place of thriving. And then lastly, this includes contribution, right? So under this model, youth are consistently encouraged and invited to be involved in their communities and create positive impact. And then the last model that we're going to be sharing is something called asset-based youth development. And so this is a model that was conceptualized and shared with us by our colleagues in New Mexico, Everett Hill and Eduardo Martinez. This is a model that challenges a worldview of youth as an amalgam of deficits or a problem to be fixed, right? It focuses on the assets that youth and the communities that they're coming from have and can be drawn upon to implement new and better ways of serving and collaborating with youth. So asset-based paradigms recognize that youth are experts in their own experiences. To quote our colleague Everett Hill, their agency is theirs, their expertise is theirs, the learning posture is ours. We become supporters on the journey, not drivers of their development. And so essentially this means agency and expertise belong to the youth. And then we as adults, we take on a posture of learning as well as a more supportive position versus one that's either driving or leading these initiatives. It's important to know that this model, effectiveness for this model is contingent on the willingness of adults to develop the necessary skills to engage with youth in this manner, as well as a commitment from adults to being educated by youth about youth experiences. And then adults can use the information to determine the ways that they can then be supportive. And also, or lastly, this model builds on positive youth development and works to ensure that youth voice and authentic collaboration are embedded at every stage of serving youth and youth-adult partnerships.
Jennifer, do you mind if I just add one thought here?
Sure, please do.
So I just wanted to say with these frameworks, I know that sometimes frameworks can seem like, you know, there's a lot to them to dig into, and it's probably hard to fully process them in a presentation like this today. But what we wanted to do is just throw out a few different models for you if you're thinking about like, how are we going to ground youth engagement in some kind of model. These might be helpful for you to do a little bit of reading about, you know, and so that you have some kind of framework that you're working with in terms of how you lift off youth engagement in your community. So that's part of the reason we're sharing them. So they're all things that you might, like there's a lot of literature, just for instance, on positive youth development that you could like dig into and read if that was interesting to you.
Thank you for adding that, Kihara. That's so helpful. I'm actually going to move into some youth engagement strategies. So we're going to spend a little time highlighting strategies for youth engagement and provide examples for each one. If any of these pique your interest, we can discuss them further a little later on. But we're going to move through this as a bit of a lightning round. So I am going to move into the next slide, which talks about collaborative processes. So some strategies for engaging youth can include collaborative processes, and what those can look like are gathering data. So that's encouraging or soliciting input from youth on the things that matter to them. And this can be done through activities or actions like listening sessions, interviews, and surveys. And then another way that you can have another collaborative process that can be used to engage youth is dialogue and thought partnership. So this is a more interactive exchange of information and ideas, as well as the potential or brainstorming of potential solutions. And then we wanted to share one more strategy and an example, and that is of collaborative projects. And those are authentic partnerships between adults and youth to work on goals that have mutually beneficial outcomes. So one example of gathering data is the website youthaction.ca. This was launched in 2018 to provide Canadian youth with the opportunity to digitally contribute to the development of the country's youth policy. The website asks Canadians to answer an online survey, and that allows them to identify issues that are most important to them and what they think are potential solutions and what can be done. And I just want to highlight that the survey questions for this particular initiative were open-ended, which can allow for more detailed feedback.
Jennifer, I just wanted to let you know, sometimes when you're turning your head, we're losing sound a little bit.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm in a little control station in New York City, so I do apologize for that. I will be more mindful. Okay, so the next strategy that we wanted to share an example is dialogue, right? So there are a few different ways to conduct dialogues. One way we wanted to highlight here was the function of creating a dialogue that allows groups of people in different locations to participate on a given day or within a specific timeline. So a quick example of that would be creating a dialogue around youth identified priorities and then providing your participants the span of 1 month to log on and participate. And so this particular initiative was called Text Talk Act. It was a SMS or text-based platform that was part of President Obama's National Dialogue for Mental Health back in 2013. And actually the platform is customizable, so you can certainly use it for a variety of topics, but in this example, it was used for a national dialogue on mental health, particularly focused on youth. And so you can hold dialogues using this platform in the absence of a facilitator by creating a script or a set of questions that can be accessed by texting a word. And in this example, it's the word start to a code like 89800. And in addition to the dialogue questions that participants receive, they'll also receive videos, web links, and phone numbers to help people connect to the resources they need. It also has a polling feature, which you can build into your dialogue so that you can then gain input or solicit information about how youth are feeling about certain issues. And actually, fun fact is Text Talk Act is still accessible. by texting START to 89800. And I would encourage anyone who's curious to see how it works to give it a try and check it out. But I do want to highlight also that you can potentially incur charges on your mobile phone account by participating. So keep that in the back of your mind. So the next strategy and example we wanted to share is that of collaborative projects. And this is the Kenyan Youth Manifesto. In 2017, the Coalition for Kenyan Youth Manifesto created the Kenyan Youth Manifesto. This was a collaborative document that brought youth voices and issues to attention during this 2017 election. And so youth and adults collaborated to make this document. Using document collaboration tools, there are certainly many that can be found online, things such as Google Docs or something akin to a Wikipedia, where participants can access online and then they can type in, or they can add text and language, or they can edit what already is inside the document. And so this collaborative process went on to have 3,000 print editions and 10,000 online downloads. And then initiatives from the manifesto actually were adopted by presidential candidates, including increased funding for youth enterprises. And so if this is something that you find interesting, or something that you might want to try out, there's a lot of real-time document collaboration tools. Again, Google Docs, Microsoft Word Online. And if you do a search online, there's a bit of a host of them, but there's one that I found that is called bit.ai. So now I want to transition into...
Sorry, do you mind if I just say one quick thing about that I just thought of? In terms of applying that concept of these collaborative documents to your work with youth engagement, like if you wanted to create some kind of governing policy or charter or even like constitution for your work, that's a really popular trend right now. Like we're seeing at municipal levels or country levels, like sort of like these open source, open document kind of constitutions that lots of different people can draft and share ideas in. And so that's a way that you could work with youth, very convenient during the pandemic as well, to include people in creating some kind of collaborative vision or document from the safety of their own homes.
Thanks, Kihara. So I just wanted to quickly transition now to youth governance structures as part of these strategies for youth engagement. So these are official formal structures that have different levels of youth engagement and participation. We have youth councils and boards, and this is a structure that allows youth to support or advise adult decision-making processes. And I just want to make a quick note or highlight that this can be done in two ways. So youth can be invited to participate on a council or a board with the goal of providing a youth lens or perspective. And these may not primarily be youth focused. And then youth can join youth councils and boards that are primarily focused on youth voice and issues. Another governance structure is youth legislature. So these are organizations that give young people a chance to learn about the political process, and in some cases take an active role in or by engaging policymakers and drafting and proposing legislation. And then we have youth-led organizations. So these are organizations led, they're for youth and they're led by youth. In some cases, they will have some support from adult advocates, but they primarily place youth at the center of the decision-making processes. So I'm going to advance the slides to share some examples of those. So an example of a youth council that we thought was interesting is Canada's Prime Minister's Youth Council. This was established in 2016. There was the goal of representing youth voice as well as shaping the country's first youth policy. So the youth that belong to the council are directly giving advice to the head of the state. And this person also serves as the Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs and Youth. I think it's the same person as the Prime Minister. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. And then the Youth Council then meet with the Prime Minister 3 to 4 times a year for face-to-face meetings. Although I just want to say that I believe with us in the middle of a pandemic, I can imagine that they might have utilized some digital tools to implement social distancing during this time. And then this platform or this youth council allows the young people in the country the opportunity to give advice directly to the top leadership. So that includes the Prime Minister, Parliament, as well as senior decision makers. The next example we wanted to share is of youth legislature, and it is of the Nevada Youth Legislature, excuse me. So this is a state program. It provides civic education to high school students, and it also provides them with opportunities to actually take part in government. The youth are able to collaborate here and draft and present bills to the Nevada legislature each term on an issue of importance to them. This gives youth the opportunity to take an active role in decision making in their state. And then the last example we wanted to share was youth-led organizations. So again, these are organizations that serve youth and are led by youth. And so young people are at the helm of all aspects of youth advocacies in these organizations. A few examples that we've included here are Integrate NYC. This is an organization that focuses on the transformation of New York City's school system. We also have Young Invincibles, and their mission is to amplify the voices of young adults in the political process, as well as expanding economic opportunity for this generation. And then we also have the Youth Activism Project, and they're an international nonpartisan organization that is designed to encourage young people to speak up and pursue lasting solutions to the problems they care deeply about. And so those are just a few examples of youth engagement strategies that we wanted to share. And certainly there are others, and many of you here are likely using a variety of strategies and tools to engage youth communities. I think kind of to echo what Kihara shared at the beginning, at the top of the webinar, the workshop, is that, it's really interesting to note 2 key things that seem to be recurring in these models and these strategies for youth engagement, and that's, youth voice. So providing space for youth to share their thoughts, particularly about the things that directly impact them, and making sure that when they share their voice, they feel heard and valued. And then another thing is authentic collaboration between youth and adults, right? So when youth have clear roles in these partnerships, it's likely that you'll have, the buy-in that helps to sustain the engagement and then can lead to deeper engagement. And so now I'm going to turn the floor over to Kihara, who's going to share a little bit more on youth engagement strategies.
Great. Jennifer, thank you so much. And so to kind of just review where we are, what Jennifer and I thought would be helpful is to introduce a few different strategies for youth engagement with some examples. And Jennifer just did the first couple collaborative processes and youth governance structures. And then I'm going to share a couple more with some examples. And then we thought we would actually get you into some groups talking about, would any of these strategies be relevant to your work? What might it look like? And so I hope that that's helpful to just kind of be keeping that in mind as you're hearing the rest of these. And I think we can go to the next slide, Jennifer, if you're ready. So another strategy is youth leadership development. And we included parents here in parentheses as well. And, one thing that I have learned in my engagement work is that engagement is a necessary but not sufficient condition for community transformation. And so a good engagement process may not be enough. And so one factor to set up successful engagement is really building leadership development opportunities alongside and as part of engagement. And what I wanted to do is share a story with you of how a community did this, because it's a little hard. This feels a little abstract if you don't have something to kind of ground in. So we can go to the next slide. This is a story of a community called Pittsfield. It's a rural community in New Hampshire, and very close-knit community. Lots of people who had lived in the community for generations, good social capital, and also in 2005 had some of the lowest performing schools in the state. So it was a community ready for change, and Pittsfield decided that they were going to do a two-pronged approach to address this issue of low performing schools and student outcomes. So they created a campaign for student-centered learning in the schools, and they also created a community organization that was focused on youth leadership and youth development, particularly for students who were more vulnerable in some way. And so those ended up, in Pittsfield, those ended up being students who were lower income, transgender students who had experienced some trauma, and also students who were people of color, because Pittsfield was a community that was primarily white. And so to be a young person of color in that school could feel somewhat vulnerable as well, and lots of systemic racism in the community and things like that. This group, Pivot, Pittsfield Youth in It Together, met regularly as a small cohort, and they focused on confidence building, on public speaking skills, on leadership and self-advocacy. And they also were part of a larger youth leadership community, so through the Annenberg Institute. And so basically, Annenberg would bring together youth like the youth in Pivot, more vulnerable youth in some way, together in these summits to really focus on understanding their social identity, understanding equity issues, particularly racial equity, but gender equity and other class equity and other equity issues as well. And for many of the students in Pittsfield, it was the first time that they had even left the sort of geographic region. And so they were exposed to this whole new community and whole new world, which was amazing for confidence building. But what Pittsfield Listens also did, and I know that many of you are familiar with this, is that we got to think intergenerationally when we're thinking about disrupting forces of poverty and other cycles. And so they created this group called FACE, which was a leadership group kind of similar to Pivot, but for parents, that focused on self-advocacy skills and development skills for parents. And both the individuals who participated in Pivot and in FACE also went through this program called Roundtables, Not Podiums, which was basically experimental civic education. And what I mean, experiential civic education. And what I mean by that is, like, rather than just learning sort of dry facts of like, what's the executive branch, what's the legislative branch, that they would meet with the school board or meet with city council or meet with the state legislature and learn, like, how do I actually use these systems? How do I voice a complaint? How do I try to create a policy? Alongside that, the parents and young people in FACE were trained as community facilitators, and they started running community dialogues where they'd ask like people across the community to come out and share their views about different social issues, particularly about the schools and about youth. And so the students in particular, but parents as well, would gain further self-confidence and self-advocacy skills by being community facilitators. And then in the schools themselves, the schools decided to create something called a site council, which was really a collaborative governance body composed of students and faculty and both parents and non-parent community members who would make decisions alongside the school board. They also implemented restorative justice, which I'm sure is a model many of you have heard of, as a disciplinary model, but made this peer-to-peer. So basically there was a whole peer advisory board that was helping to try to determine, like, you know, when a young person made a mistake, like, you know, how do we create meaningful learning opportunities for that young person instead of punitive, sort of disciplinary measures. And when it came to parent-teacher conferences, Pittsfield replaced them with student-led conferences. So essentially, the student would identify their learning goals and work with their teachers to kind of decide what they wanted to talk about in the meeting. And they could ask whoever they wanted to support them in the conferences, not just their parents, but any other peers or any other adults in their life who they felt were supports in their learning. So I hope that this is helpful to see, like, how a leadership development process and an engagement process could kind of be integrated and run parallel to each other. And we can go on to the next slide. So the other thing, and I know this seems so basic, but we really don't see it all the time, is the value of making engagement fun. And you know what I would say is that if you create a boring event that has difficult material and it's heavy and it's a long and arduous process, you're probably not going to attract certain populations who choose to spend their time having fun. And so, you know, can you integrate fun things into engagement opportunities like music, like games, food, you know, when we can meet in person again, dancing, festivals, you know, basically things that people want to do anyway, but then like add or integrate an engagement component into it. And we have this great quote from one of our colleagues who's a consultant in Colorado, where she says, sometimes you need a meeting that is also a party, and sometimes you need a party that is also a meeting. So we can go on to the next slide. So I wanted to share an example of making engagement fun. This is kind of an out of the box example. So our colleague, Jonathan Garcia, who works at Oregon State, did a project where he was wanted to hear the voices and experiences of youth who are experiencing homelessness and also LGBTQ plus youth. And as many as you may know, a lot of the time this overlaps. So youth might lose their homes because of sharing their gender identity or with their parents and be displaced or not feel welcome. And so what Jonathan shared with us is that these youth had identified alternative families with their peers because family life had been difficult. And what he did was he basically brought these families together in houses, kind of like Harry Potter's, like Gryffindor or Slytherin, which Jennifer identified. And he did a Zoom drag ball. So basically it was like a drag queen competition, and he did this on Zoom. So prior to more serious engagement about issues, that all the houses had this kind of like drag competition, and then they talked about more serious issues facing LGBTQ plus and homeless youth. And we can go on to the next slide. And then this is another example of making engagement fun. So some of you might have heard of this before, of this concept of crowdsourcing, which is really the idea that lots of different people come together for an intensive period of time to try to address some kind of social problem. So Oakland did this in a project called Ubuntu Hack. And basically they brought together youth, members of the police community, tech professionals, local activists in for a couple days to try to create some kind of an app to address tensions between police and the local community. So that's another example of making engagement fun. We can move on. And the last strategy that I wanted to share with you, and then we're going to ask you to get into some groups and talk, is the idea of training up youth workers. And by youth workers, I mean some of you, people who are adults who work with youth in some way. So you might be a youth service provider, you might work with an organization that's trying to do youth leadership development, something like that. And the idea here is that adults need to learn to work with youth just as much as youth need leadership skills and opportunities for participation. And one of the challenges here is that many adults really aren't quite sure how to share the space between, like, you know, empowering youth without overwhelming them, or including youth without tokenizing them. But the good thing is you can learn these skills. These skills can be learned. And one thing I just kind of wanted to share about why this is important, which I think has broader equity implications when we think about engagement, is that when I was talking with our colleagues Everett Hill and Eduardo Martinez, and I think Eduardo might even be on in this meeting today, one thing that we talked about is the need to change systems along with individual change. So the idea here is that youth can go through leadership training and they can develop all these great skills, but then they might go back into institutions where adults aren't allowing them to use the skills, right? And that can be really problematic. So the institutions and the adults need to change alongside the youth is basically the idea here. And we have an example of that if we go on to the next slide. So this is some of our colleagues at an organization called New Hampshire Listens. And basically they created this project where they had a cohort of youth serving organizations throughout the state that went through trainings together around how do we cultivate youth voice? How do we really build opportunities for participation for youth in our work? And it was a very like diverse coalition of folks representing different points of view. So they had the American Friends Service Committee, the NAACP, and a refugee and immigrant representing organization. And I think we can go on. So what we wanted to do now is actually take some time to unpack this a little bit, because I know that was a lot of content. I will say that we also emailed you out these questions because in a moment we're going to go into breakout rooms. So if you, we can chat these out too, but if you end up kind of forgetting these questions, you can look in the email that Jennifer sent most recently about this event. But basically what we thought we'd do is ask you to get into breakout rooms of groups of about 3 and reflect on some of these strategies together and just kind of talk about, you know, what are some of your takeaways from these strategies. You may have other youth engagement work that you've been doing that you want to share with your peers. And I mean, we would love for you to do that, and we'd love to hear about it as well. And then it'd be cool if you could take some time to brainstorm what youth engagement strategies could you actually build into your work. And you may even get down the road enough to start thinking about like some challenges you anticipate or some first steps in getting started. Jennifer, are we ready to break out?
Yes. Let me just make sure that we have this evenly distributed among people.
And I thought what we could do is like a 10-minute discussion about this, and then come back together in the big group and unpack this and kind of hear what you started to brainstorm in your smaller group. So we'll have kind of a 2-part discussion in smaller groups and then in a bigger group. Yay, I see some people on camera. That's nice. I know we didn't give you a ton of time, but I hope that at least started to get some ideas flowing. So I'm wondering if anyone wanted to, we'd love to hear if people have some ideas about these questions, either some reflections from today or some ideas of how you might integrate some of these youth engagement strategies or other strategies into your work. And people can feel free to either chat their ideas or just unmute yourself, whatever you feel comfortable with.
I can share.
Thanks, Amy.
Okay. I apologize, I'm a little shiny. I was running on the treadmill while listening because there's no time in a day to exercise. So that's why I wasn't on camera, but I was listening and I really enjoyed the content. So thank you. In our breakout room, First of all, my name is Amy Suman. I'm the Director of Health Equity for the New Mexico Department of Health. And I came up through the ranks as a high school teacher for 15 years and elementary as well, but finished my career at high school after 15 years working in Title I schools here in Albuquerque. And youth engagement, especially as a teacher in a large urban high school with high minority populations, is absolutely crucial. If you cannot make relationships with your students and be able to see something from their point of view, you'll never be able to get them to learn. And so it was interesting in our breakout group, we kind of talked about the difficulties of engaging youth. But for me now in times of COVID, with our state absolutely exploding with cases and nearly a third of our population not even having health insurance because our state is so poor. We have a major issue with trying to engage our youth to get them to understand that they aren't invincible. And even if they're not going to get terribly sick, they could get the people that they live with terribly sick. And with our provider shortage, we're at crisis right now. We're picking and choosing who has the best survivability because our hospitals are too full. So I think it's really important to figure out ways that we can engage our youth and invite them to the table. A lot of times they just want to be heard and being treated. They aren't adults, I can tell you that because I've raised 2 of them of my own, but they think they are, and trying to engage them in a way that meets them at that level and lets them know that their opinions matter and what they have to say, and having a voice at the table is really important. So that's kind of what we talked about in our breakout.
Thank you, Amy. I'm curious if people want to respond to what Amy shared or to share some other ideas.
So
Please.
I'll go next. We actually didn't get to it in our breakout, but Sydney and I, she's the one that says Holly Chavez, we are going to be starting an LGBTQ club here in Valencia County. We are going to be doing an online portion as well as 2 in-person portions. So for those of you guys who are not familiar with Belen specifically, we live in a very rural community, a very closed-minded community with absolutely 0 LGBTQ resources. We have places on our directory, on our resource directory, that are listed as LGBTQ friendly, but those places stop at like pizza places where it seems like they just allow LGBTQ communities to eat there. So we saw that this was a pretty big problem. My job is a RAC specialist. I'm a resource specialist in Valencia County, so is Sydney. And we noticed that we had several clients coming in with nothing. They had no sense of community here. And so we decided to start looking for grants and make this something that can happen. And so this training was really, really fantastic for me, at least, in the aspect of engaging youth. That engaging youth entirely is a totally different talent, but especially engaging youth and minorities that don't really have a voice is going to be super important.
Would others like to share, either to respond to Jenna and Amy or to share some other thoughts? I'd love to hear what people talked about in their breakouts. Or if you didn't get to share something in your breakout that you wanted to, this is your chance.
Kiana, I'll take a shot at it. I was in the breakout with Gina. I think it's Gina, yes. And we didn't have a lot of time, so I just kind of shared with her about the youth group that I'm working with, my urban climate action network group, and just, kind of shared with her about what we've been doing over the last 4 years, convening, having them meet with other children in other states, and do some peer learning, because all these children are minority children, well, students rather, in high school, very, very intelligent kids. And so I think that each state was able to take home something different that they were not doing with the students. And I just kind of shared that with Gina, and that's what we talked about.
Thank you, Daphne, for sharing that. Well, one question I have to the group, if I know that we didn't have a ton of time in the breakout rooms, but one question I have to the group, you know, before we wrap up today is we kind of have this opportunity because we've got a bunch of people in the room who are all interested in youth engagement. And so I'm curious if anyone is trying to do some youth engagement work right now and has like a challenge that they're encountering, or even like, you know, if folks wanted to sort of float like an approach that you're trying to take and get feedback from your peers here. It's just a nice opportunity because we have this collective of folks. So just wanted to open it up if folks had anything they wanted to kind of workshop with the group.
I don't want to dominate the conversation, but nobody else is saying anything. So I wanted to share a strategy that we used when we did some focus groups with teens when I worked at the University of New Mexico. And what we found is getting teens to talk is really challenging, especially in a focus group setting when you're trying to collect, qualitative data from them. They kind of shut down because they don't like, they don't want to be judged. So what we did is we started off with an icebreaker. We found some research that indicated that this new generation, which is Generation Z, communicates primarily in emojis. And which is kind of funny when you consider that the origins of language, a lot of it had to do with hieroglyphics. But what we did is we found that instead of starting a focus group by saying, how's everyone feeling today? Tell us 5 things about you or whatever, and nobody wanted to go, we came up with about 100 different emojis and several different, 4 or 5 of each kind. And we asked the kids if they would please pick 5 emojis that described how they were feeling or things that were important to them, and that we would just go around the room and share. The amount of data we collected when we started that was unbelievable. We were able to put it into in vivo software. We were able to kind of survey our data and look for a lot of different parallels. It was a wonderful tool and technique for engaging the youth because we were using a language that they like, that they understand, that's comfortable. And we got so much more out of it. So I don't know if that's a strategy that could help other people, but certainly, meeting them where they are. If their language is emojis and that's what they relate to, then we need to meet them where they are and try that. So I just wanted to share that.
So creative. And that idea of meeting people where they are is really critical in engagement. So yeah, thank you for sharing that, Amy. And I actually, to, I guess, piggyback on Kihara's opening the floor to the questions she posed, I was going to ask if there were any youth engagement strategies that weren't mentioned that you're using that are particularly effective.
I think people might be a little shy today, or maybe tired because it may be the end of the day, depending on your time zone, or lunchtime for some. But what I would say is a couple things. So we've got a nice collective of people here who are interested in youth engagement. If you would like, we can try to sort of keep this group in touch with each other. If you want to kind of have other peers to process youth engagement work with. So I guess what I would say is maybe let me know if you don't want to be part of that community, but otherwise we can send out an email with everyone's email on it in case anyone ever wants to do a blast with an article or, ask a question to the group or something like that. The other thing that I would say is that we'll send out the slide deck, and I know we kind of whizzed through a bunch of resources today, but each of these websites, like if you went to the Canada website that Jennifer mentioned, that was looking at like surveying youth or creating like a youth parliament. There's a lot of rich stuff there and modeling, and I think as you read about it or read about like positive youth development, I think some wheels might start turning in your head. So we'll definitely send out the PowerPoint slides with those resources if you want to dig in more. And we do have a lot of other youth engagement resources that we ended up not putting in the slide deck just so as not to overwhelm people. But we have more, and we're happy to talk with you if you want to have more of a dedicated conversation about intersections between your work and youth engagement. One thing for people who we haven't met yet, with Community Voices for Health, Public Agenda is an organization that specializes in engagement. And one thing that we do is engagement coaching. And so we're happy to sort of like be a thought partner with you while you're thinking around like how to design an engagement process or an initiative and what that might look like. So if we can be helpful, we're very happy to do that with you and learn with you. And we'd love to just keep posted on your work with youth. As Amy mentioned, this is just it's always a critical time for engaging youth, in my opinion, but right now I think youth are particularly vulnerable, and we need to, and also making other people vulnerable potentially, and so we need to think about that intentionally. So I just wanted to thank you all for making the time today. We know how valuable your time is. And we hope to keep this going and keep connected. So we can end a little early and have some found time, unless anyone else has something to say.
Well, this is Heidi. I just wanted to say thank you. I mean, I'm quiet because I'm not doing youth engagement right now. I'm keenly interested in it. This has been really helpful. We didn't have any time during the breakout to actually talk about the examples, but Amy was in my breakout. We literally just got through introductions when you pulled us back in. So Amy, Thank you for sharing that with the broader group. But again, it's not for lack of participating, because we're not doing it. And so I just want to thank you guys. Thank
you. Yeah. And we had a little issue with the breakout rooms timing out too quickly. So I'm sorry about that, but thank you for saying that. And we appreciate you all being here.